the Nkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Center complex in Durban. An audience of over 1,000 women flocked to the venue for the 5th Forbes Women Africa Leading Women Summit. They were there to network and listen to prominent speakers from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Botswana, and South Africa, delivering talks and contributing to insightful panel discussions. It was the 2nd year running that the event was hosted by KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Government. The theme for the day was The Ceiling Crashers 2.0 Power with Purpose. The annual summit is an editorialized event which gives attendees the chance to physically engage with the hard-hitting stories and inspiring people that feature on every page of Forbes Africa.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to the 2020 Forbes Women Africa Leading Women Summit here in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. I'm Kukulethu Mfupi and I have the pleasure of being your co-MC today.
And I am Fifi Peters. I also have the pleasure of being with you here today at the 5th Forbes Africa Leading Women Summit and the 2nd to be held right here in KZN Durban.
Indeed, one of the major reasons why we gathered here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, it is really on the back of a woman who has made it her passion, her vision, and part of her mission across the African continent to celebrate women, acknowledge women, and most importantly, enhance the collaborative efforts that we all look to drive. It's part of the reason why we actually have this particular event here today. Ladies and gentlemen, she is the face behind Forbes Africa and Forbes Women Africa magazine, someone who has prioritized the gender agenda for most of her life. Please warmly welcome, with a level 3 applause, the managing editor of Forbes Women Africa magazine, RENUKA METHIL.
RENUKA METHIL is the managing editor of the award-winning Forbes Women Africa and Forbes Africa titles. With 23 years of experience in mainstream print media across several geographies and the emerging economies of Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East and Africa, she is particularly excited about the future of female entrepreneurship and leadership on the African continent.
This summit here, now, in stunning KwaZulu-Natal, may be a tiny blip on the radar, but it is one that is surging with a collective might of 1,000 beating hearts in this room here today to mark a moment in history when we ask ourselves, are we going to leave the companies, countries, and the communities we lead in a better shape than we found it? Years later, when history judges us and asks us the question, are we going to greet it with silence or with the collective roar of the pioneering, groundbreaking, relentless work that the women who have gone before us have done, and those that are still to come will do? There is no mistake in this moment. Each one of you has earned the invitation to this success. This is your hard-earned victory, your victory over all those moments of hardship and dismay, when you thought you were alone, when you made the long zigzag, risky climb to the top, as an entrepreneur, as a head of state, as an Olympic athlete, as a scientist, as an artist, as an activist, as a woman who has gone through dark days and even dark nights and even darker days. This here today is your moment in time. Good morning, Durban. A warm welcome to all the attendees and the delegates who have come from near and far to the 2020 Forbes Women Africa Leading Women Summit. Now, why this year is so special is because this is the 5th edition of the summit, which has grown from a small audience of women in a ballroom to this breathtaking, star-studded gathering today. Diversity should be a strategic goal for all, and this has been the key focus of the award-winning brand Forbes Women Africa. Now, this year, the theme of the summit is The Ceiling Crashers 2.0 Power with Purpose. For decades, the glass ceiling has been an immutable reality for the growing global female workforce. The glass ceiling is still very much in place and is a hard reality, but you will, I'm sure, agree that the cracks on that glass ceiling are now definitely beginning to show. And then there are the many who have they've already triumphantly crashed through these invisible barriers to disrupt existing power structures and set the templates of success for others to follow. So we decided to move beyond the cliches and call them the ceiling crashers, the achievers, the extraordinary women who've gone steps ahead to use their power and success as a currency to global change. And as many of you know, there is also another term to describe the existence of a different kind of barrier, and that's called the glass cliff. I've been reading a lot about it now. It's actually the disturbing tendency, the glass cliff, is a disturbing tendency for women to be appointed the leaders of failing ventures where they attain or are given leadership positions, roles during periods of crisis or tough economic times. So basically they're set up for failure by the male gender. So the failure is highest, and that further plays into the stereotypes. But the greater the adversities, the harder they fight. And we have a collection of them, these women, in the just released March issues of Forbes Women Africa and Forbes Africa, which I'm sure you have in your bags right now. Please go through them. It is a first of its kind, unranked list of Africa's 50 most powerful women. Ladies and gentlemen, some of these women are in the audience with us today. They could be sitting to your left and right. So you could be bumping into power all the time today. Surely, if this room were a country, this would be the Africa we dream about. A unified continent with colossal women leading every sector. Now, before I welcome on stage our next guest for the morning, the Ethequity Councillor and former Deputy Mayor, Ms. Fauzia Pierre, I'd like to invite you all once again to this beautiful day. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the 2020 Forbes Women Africa Leading Women Summit. Thank you.
Today we are celebrating successful women who have become leading authority on the business world, specializing in entrepreneurship and disruption, who have managed to climb the corporate ladder and succeeding in turning business around. Ladies, we must not forget those women in rural areas who sometimes feel invisible. I stand here today in solidarity with those women in the remote areas of our country who keep the fires burning in their homes. I'm talking about mothers and grandmothers who have formed cooperatives to sell vegetables or have come together and established sewing clubs. It is these women who are always in the shadows, but continue to keep the family structure intact. While we are here to highlight and celebrate professional women, we must always remember those unsung heroines who are still marginalized. To this end, let it be our mission to create a conducive environment for our young girls who aspire to lead one day, not to go through the same challenges we experienced. Let us empower each other to change the status quo and level the playing fields. Men and women in the same position, doing the same job, should be paid equally. The Gender Gap report issued by the World Economic Forum this year predicted that it will take approximately 257 years for the world to reach gender parity at the current rate of progress. So with this gloomy outlook, we will be within our right as women and mothers to girls to be impatient and demand equality. I was also given the honor to introduce my comrade, my leader, Nomusa Dube-Ngube is the newly appointed member of the Executive Council responsible for economic development, tourism, and environmental affairs. Having served as a member of the Executive Council for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs for 2 terms since 2009.
In particular, we know that topics under discussion and the lineup of speakers in display has got a strong determination to ensure that women remain in the driving seats of the socio-economic development. It should also be remembered, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa women in general have achieved heroism through a wide range of spectrum and actions since the dawn of the century. Here, we talk of women from Eritrea to Uganda, from Cape to Cairo. This continent owes its freedom to a list of women that is too long to mention. We have Abomama Oliver Tambo, Abomama Albertina Sisulu, Abomama Victoria Mxenge, Fatima Mie, Miriam Makeba, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and many others to mention, that those heroines of our struggle against apartheid have inspired many of us in South Africa and beyond the borders. How can I forget Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia, who, by becoming the first African women head of state, instilled in women the invaluable belief that the sky is not the limit. Without attempting to unpack topics under discussion here today, I wish to point out that this summit, in celebrating the freedom of African women and people from the bondage of many oppressions, it is about also reawakening the spirit of sisterhood and strengthening the solidarity among the African women. We are here to remind each other that our fate is bound together. The summit gives us that opportunity to recharge, to redefine our steps in the fight for dignity of the African women, irrespective of which part of the globe we may be coming from. We have the opportunity here to look at the strength that we utilize to advance ourselves. We must point out the weaknesses that are hindering us from ensuring that we advance, but also we advance the African child. It is also important to remind one another that our struggle is not over. Despite the political freedom that we have attained, including the right to vote and participate in various institutions of governance in the land, the African people as a group still suffer from extreme poverty. We still die from preventable disease. We have a lower rates of life expectancy. So these are the issues that I believe will inspire us as women to say, despite all these challenges, despite everything that we see before us, it is true that the majority of all of us are still illiterate. It is also true that the majority of women are still trapped in those shackled. And it's also true, our brothers and sisters, that our uncles, our sons and grandsons tend to get sucked into the crime and drug abuse. We are experiencing the high rate of teenage pregnancies, with many girls dropping out of school. So as a way of kickstarting this day, as a way of recharging our batteries, the summit must not be another talk shop. We must chart the way forward. That is why we thought we must have these diverse ideas, the merging of minds so that we can all live here inspired. Let us draw inspiration from many women who brought about this freedom we are enjoying today.
This fantastic event that we are having and that we're going to continue to have for the rest of the day wasn't only brought to us by the KZN government, the partners, MasterCard, are also behind everything that we are going to experience today, those warm, encouraging and inspirational words. MasterCard in itself is a private sector player that is doing quite a lot to advance the narrative of women, particularly in the finance space, so driving that narrative of financial inclusion.
As country manager for MasterCard South Africa, Suzanne MOREL oversees performance, strategic direction, and brand development, and is tasked with realizing the company's vision of a world beyond cash.
We recently implemented a program called Women by Design, which requires us to incorporate women's perspectives in the design of all products. So why did we do this? We did it because 73% of women worldwide have said that they're not happy with the financial products that are offered to them. And we know that it's close to 90% of decisions made by African women when it comes to household purchases are either made solely by them or they're co-made by them. So Women by Design is not just about asking women what works and doesn't work and doing more research. It really means understanding women's views because we're incorporating women in every step of the product design process. And I want to be clear that this isn't about pink washing a product, right? It's not about just saying we're going to create a pink credit card and somehow that's going to solve women's needs. It's about truly understanding deeply and saying that you want to deliver real value. And when women's financial needs are met, it's a win for women, their families, and businesses like our own. We also have the MasterCard Financial Labs for Financial Inclusion, where you use data and insights the labs generate to support women's businesses. So this MasterCard Index for women entrepreneurs that we have shows that women are creating more businesses than men in Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, and they're closing the gap in Angola and in Malawi. We have to fuel every one of those efforts to drive equality. And sometimes it's as simple as doing what we've done today, which is sitting in this room. We have 40 entrepreneurs that we offer tickets to, because sometimes all you need to do is just open the door and give them access to a day like this. Third, it's knowing that we have a responsibility to lead change that goes well beyond our company walls. We have the Center for Financial Inclusion, whose premise is that if you include people, particularly women, in the digital economy, their education and economic prospects will improve. We have the goal of bringing 500 million people into the digital economy by the end of 2020, and we're going to meet that goal. We'll achieve that goal knowing that we've provided largely women with financial access that really affords the dignity of saying, I see you. So when I was reflecting on the theme of this day, breaking the glass ceiling, power with purpose, I looked at the first part of it with breaking the glass ceiling, and I look at a room like this. I mean, your individual growth in your businesses, your careers, you're breaking that glass ceiling. Your success is actually making it so that this is the norm. It's no longer the exception. And when I go back to thinking about those girls that I met last Friday morning at Phoenix College, I think about how we can plant the seeds and we can open up the opportunities, but they need to be able to look out into a world and see examples like you. When I think about power with purpose, it's predicted that African women are going to only achieve equality in 142 years. Well, I'm not willing to wait that long. I want equality in my lifetime. All of us here, we're leaders. And so my challenge to you is to say, don't wait until you think you've achieved that image that you have for yourself of full success. Don't wait until you think you've accumulated all of your power. Start by just increasing the efforts to mentor, to promote women within your own companies and your businesses. Support women-led businesses. As I just told you, 90% of purchasing decisions are being made by you in this room. Just think of what that would look like if you made a conscious consumer decision to buy from a small woman's business. And then design products with women's input. and then simply just sponsor girls in schools. I mean, after all, a world that works better for women creates limitless possibilities for all of us. So let me close where I started, which is the importance of believing in girls and opening the doors for them so they can see all the possibilities.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start off with the first panel discussion for the day, and it's going to be an interactive one, and we certainly hope that your excitement levels are there too. Taking a look at a very critical theme in terms of understanding how best we can restructure the C-suite executive for the advancement and development of women. Not to the detriment of our male counterparts, but ensuring that we all participate in the growth that is required in our economy, and most importantly, how we take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution in this regard.
Dr. Judy Dlamini is the founder and executive chairman of Mbekani Group, a medical doctor turned entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist. She's currently chairman of the Wits Donald Gordon Medical Center and chancellor of Wits University.
One of the things that is true but painful is that unfortunately, as women, you still have to work so much harder just to be recognized and take so much longer just to get that promotion. But the good thing is it's possible and you have what it takes to do it. And as more women accelerate to ascend to the C-suite and CEO position, it will change. But I actually want to say this because maybe it's because of age that I'm getting impatient, that it's taking forever. For the past 20 years, we've been talking about 3.5%, 5%
Yes.
of
Female
CEOs.
representation.
Exactly. I see with the Fortune 500, there's excitement that, oh, it's 33, but that's less than 7%, but it's the highest that it's been. And maybe there is something to be learned from the activism that we've observed. Weinstein would be in jail today if it was not for Me Too movement, right?
Yes.
And coming back to this country, the blackout last year, what did it do? We now have allocation of 1.8 billion rand. Last week, they actually reallocated places of safety for women, and it's going to increase from 54 to 102. Why? Because of activism. So it's all well and good to say, well, we actually have the Gender Equality Index. We actually believe that we need more women because if you increase gender by 1%, the revenue increases by 3%.
Yes.
You increase diversity in terms of ethnicity, revenue increases by 15%. But it's taking forever. So I truly believe as a continent, we need to be activists. Just conferences without saying, in 2020, this is where we are. In 2030, this is where we should be. What should we do as a country, as a continent, to push for this change? Because power is difficult to get, to actually let go. People know that women are good at what they do and they have what it takes to run these countries and run these economies.
Exactly.
But we don't want to do that because the stereotype has to remain that women are less. So unless women become activists for their own emancipation, it's not going to happen.
Indeed.
Just one thing that I would like to say.
Go ahead, briefly,
right?
ma'am.
For us as South Africans, we were the last to be freed from our colonizer. We didn't do it on our own. We actually had a lot of countries that are sitting in this room that helped us to achieve it within the continent, but also outside.
Sure.
So that activism within the continent, we need to go back to it because that emancipation, we're still lacking when it comes to women. And I want to say it again, it won't happen on its own.
Indeed. It will not happen on its own. We need increased collaborative efforts to drive the activism in order to manage to see the change that we want to see take place within South Africa's corporate space. We move on to our next panel discussion, and this time around really focused around female entrepreneurship, access and acceptability. We all know access to capital, access to markets, and ensuring that you're collaborating with the right partners are some of the core fundamentals that drive and encourage entrepreneurship development across the continent. But how do we get there? Where are we lacking? What are some of the opportunities that we need to tap into?
Ebehiji Momo is Senior Vice President and General Manager for West Africa at MasterCard. Based in Nigeria, she's responsible for advancing the MasterCard brand presence in West Africa. Nkiru Olamide Ojo is a financial services executive, author, and founder of the Lighthouse Women's Network. She has 2 decades of experience looking after multinational and national brands in Nigeria and some African markets, and in sectors including financial services, aviation, telecommunications, and oil and gas. Songoba Vuba is a disruptor in the education space. Currently, she's Managing Director of Perpetuate, an advisory and implementation consultancy for SMMEs. With a deep passion for systemic change in areas of social development, Songoba has played a number of roles in a number of sectors.
Fantastic. Let's get talking, ladies. We did hear at the top that Africa is the only continent where there are more women who are choosing to be entrepreneurs than there are men, right? Yet there is a number of headwinds that these women face in trying to do this, and these headwinds are constraining them from reaching their full potential as businesswomen. So we're here to talk about ladies who, as I look at you, I wonder what kind of challenges you are experiencing at the C-suite, because you sit at the C-suite, you sit at the boardroom table, you're kind of on top of your game. What would you say about the topic of discussion regarding female entrepreneurs being held back? I mean, is that still a case now in 2020?
There are more than a couple of things that are precluding female entrepreneurs from being as successful as they should be. And I think I'm going to dwell on 3 things. First is a lack of capital. And I know that every time we talk about a lot of capital, people come around and say, yes, but men too lack capital. Yes, it is true that men lack capital, but the recent research showed that an average entrepreneur, male entrepreneur on the continent, his business has 6 times more capital than the female. And that is just one of them. I think also the choice of businesses that we agree as women to get into, I think that we have a leaning to the more traditional types of businesses. I mean, it's so easy, and that's not to say we don't have great African designers. But just based on how we grew up and what we see, we tend to go towards all the regulars and all the basics. So it's also the choice of businesses. And I think lastly would also be the commercial practices. So what are we doing? We talk about not having collateral and talk about being heavily challenged with this lack of collateral. But what commercial practices are we putting together to ensure that our businesses are able to get the capitals that, that we seek? So I think I'll stop with these 3 and then hand it over to the rest of my colleagues.
When we talk about equality, let's start from that. It's not a women thing anymore. It is a business thing. For example, when we're listening to the last speaker, she talks so much about the fact that we bring in skills that drive innovation. And even though we have indeed issues when it comes to financing, what we see, MasterCard, for example, we have an index called the MasterCard Index for Entrepreneurs. And that is a landscape, what we use to find out the landscape about women. And what we saw beyond the issue of capital, like you said, the depth in credit, is the fact that women lack the confidence. The confidence, the bureaucracies that comes with getting those finances. One of the things that we have done at MasterCard, for example, is training right here, in working with junior achievement here in South Africa, is working with women to begin to understand, how do I put my finances in? How do I ensure that I have a good record that is presentable? You see a man working there with so much confidence, he has done his homework. How many of us have done that homework? How many of us have indeed checked what is the content of my proposal? What is it that I'm selling? How can you do that? I'm very glad that working with junior achievement, training women between the ages of 18 to 35 years old, we go train them, understand the entrepreneurial skills as well as the business skill, understand how to put a business plan in place.
Right.
Right in Nigeria, where I'm from, the Youth for Technology, one of the things that we did in the last 5 years, we've trained over 15,000 women. And what are we doing? We're training them through online as well as through the classroom, putting a business plan in place, getting that confidence so that when you come to the bank, you're able to, present a proposal that is acceptable.
It's always important to share kind of the full value chain of funding for businesses, because I think oftentimes we found entrepreneurs trying to go straight to kind of large banks for funding, which really is more later stage funding for business. And it's important for us to unpack what that value chain looks like, considering kind of the conversation, especially in this country where it's legislated, and there are literally over 20 billion rand in funds that are actually being channeled towards ESD and enterprise development, and yet at the same time we see the opposite trend. It's a growing amount of money that's available, but actually a declining amount of businesses that are being successful and actually managing to scale. And the question becomes, why is that, right? So in the value chain of funding, you kind of have angel investors and grant funding when you're still at inception phase and still trying to test out your idea and actually be able to commercialize it. You then are able to move into kind of more venture capital funds and then kind of more into leveraged finance in the banking world. And I think that first and foremost, it's important for women to educate themselves on the value chain of funding and where they are in maturity of their business and where they should really be going for funding. Right? Then the second thing for me is kind of once you've gone to the right place for funding, I mean, one of the stats that was shared in the MasterCard video was that of all VC investments, only 3% are going to female-founded businesses. The flip side of that stat is 92% of partners in VC funds are men. The stats kind of speak for themselves. We all have a sense of bias where we kind of like align with and understand those who look like us and kind of invest in them and align with them and so on. And the reality is that from an investor space, that needs to be transformed to be more gender equitable.
We've focused on Women's Day and International Women's Day specifically, constantly focusing on ourselves, so-called the fairer sex, but of course understanding how we as women need to collaborate, exchange and engage in our growth potential. But in this world that we live in, we are not the only sex that matters. We have our male participants who also need to be part of the gender agenda. So we're going to take a look now at a new conversation, again building up on many of the conversations we've had in the past in terms of understanding how it is that men can participate in the upliftment and elevation of women in the corporate space, and understanding most importantly some of the strategies that can be implemented to help grow, improve on gender parity across the continent.
Bafana Khumalo is a senior strategic advisor and co-founder at Sonke Gender Justice. He has a long and accomplished track record in the NGO sector and was senior gender technical advisory for Engender Health South Africa between 2012 and 2013. Ngabandiweni, or Q, is a director at PwC. He has worked across the capital markets assurance businesses of PwC, both in South Africa and in the United Kingdom, and is head of transformation in South Africa for the assurance business. Mafahle Mareletsi is Group Vice President TMEA and General Manager for Avon. He is extremely passionate about empowering women to achieve financial autonomy and ensuring a safer environment for women and girls. Charmaine Mabuza is the co-founder and Group CEO of Zamani Holdings. This award-winning powerhouse rose to the top while juggling life as an entrepreneur after school. In 2008, she launched Zamani, a holding company for various independent companies, including Ituba, the national lottery operator.
We have reflected on a decade that has gone by. We're still working towards our goals through Agenda 2063 in terms of attaining levels of increased gender parity within the African continent. But when you look back, in terms of SA specifically in the last 10 years, and in comparison to our counterparts on the continent, have we managed to make any progress?
I think that it's a mixed bag. We've made some strides in terms of policies. I think when we started, you'll recall in '94, there were fewer women in parliament, for instance, less than 30%. That increased somewhat to just over 40% as the years progressed. But as fate would have it, we also regressed in the last administration. The numbers dropped. We had fewer cabinet ministers who were women. In the current administration, I'm glad to say we have 50% women, which is a very positive move. Possibly it should have been 60% given that women are majority. But in the private space, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. If one look at the companies in the JSE, very few of them are run by women CEOs. Very few women are chairpersons of the boards. And so we still need to do a lot of work in that regard.
And that does call on a multi-pronged approach in order to make sure that we bring more women in terms of their level of participation there. Charmaine, I'd like to throw this one at you.
It's true. We've really regressed when it comes to equalization, especially in the corporate space. And largely because we talk about these things in policy, but action and monitoring is almost non-existent. And there's no repercussions or consequences if corporates do not meet the so-called targets. And also there's a lack of consciousness in our leadership, in the boardrooms, like the chairpersons and board members. You will know that there's a large number in middle management when it comes to leadership in women. But leadership itself is almost non-existent, that you'll see women taking their place on the table when it comes to these matters. It's a great pity because we have regressed, and I think the question and the challenge is around these men who are here and ourselves who are able to make things happen. What are we doing about it?
From a PwC perspective, we realized many years ago that if you look at the pace of making gender equality real, it wasn't quick enough. We saw that as an organization, we're absorbing, call it a 50-50 men to women rate. But as you look at it from a leadership perspective, we weren't getting the traction. And there's various reasons for that. But most of how we're starting to challenge ourselves today is to say, the policy is there, the strategy is there, the CEO has rubber stamped it, we signed up for he, for she, but it's got to go beyond that, right? And it goes beyond that on the day-to-day basis. You talk about power with purpose, and the question we continue to ask ourselves is, you can hit the targets, right, and bring inclusion into the business, but are you really allowing the women to have influence in the organization? So influence talks to what roles are you actually giving them? Are you giving them meaningful roles or just roles that only look at, call it staff matters? So it's really, call it changing that paradigm shift. And to use a simple example, speakers have spoken this morning around a 250-year journey to get there.
Yeah.
Right? And what that really means is we've allowed ourselves to say we're going to go at a snail's pace to get there. And in the mind of a snail thinks it's really moving and it's motoring. But the reality is the snail's going slowly. And the 250-year journey means the parents that are yet to be born are actually not also going to experience equality. So in our minds, we want to fast-track that pace, and we certainly have to do it on a day-to-day basis and make sure that every man in the organization understands that it's his problem as well. And they have to be advocates for it.
You've hit the nail on the head on an element that I do want us to touch on, and that goes to mentality. Because the truth is, we can have all the paperwork that we want, we can sign off on it, we can tick the boxes, but unless it actually speaks to the mentality of the male counterparts that are interacting with these females, then we're not going to see much of a change. Mafahla, I want to get you into the conversation as well. You're a male, and you're leading quite an influential organization that has women as its client base and customer base, women within its distribution network, and even, I understand, working within the manufacturing of cosmetics that is pushed forward here. Avon has also taken a critical role in trying to cultivate entrepreneurship and having more women come on board with a variety of hashtag initiatives that I understand you have in place. How have you made this practical? And also, you happen to be a man leading this kind of initiative. What is it for you that actually sparked the interest, the intrigue, and that works for you in terms of your leadership capabilities that can be shared with our other male counterparts?
I never thought I'd be called a male feminist. It's quite an interesting term. But I think just a bit of history about Avon. You know, the beauty industry is a big industry. Globally, it's a $530 billion market. In rand terms, 8 trillion rand. So it's a big market. But when Avon was started, the people who started realized that, you know, largely the consumers of the beauty industry are women. But women were just consumers, and the economic spectators were on the sidelines. And so they developed a model that said, how can we get women to actually not just be consumers, but to economically benefit from this industry? And hence they started a model that said, we will involve women in the industry by ensuring that women become actually the sellers of the product that sell to other women. And by that, then they found that actually by letting women, giving them an opportunity to be beauty entrepreneurs, they were empowering them. Because the first step of women empowerment is financial independence. And that's how it became. And then eventually, Avon became the company for women. So it went from just being an external empowerment of women to how do we ensure that we live our purpose of saying we want to empower women. So internally, women, Avon is actually a company for women.
I'm already intrigued by that stat and figure that you shared with us, and perhaps you can also give us some insight as to, whilst it is a company for women and they're participating economically, how many men do you have on board who assist in terms of mentorship, sponsorship, and even just additional support in trying to create awareness of Avon and the women who are economically emancipating themselves through this initiative?
We actually have very few men because the majority of our people are women. My boss is a woman. The world executive is full of women. We are outnumbered as men leaders in our business. It's mostly women, and now it's for the women to actually do what is expected from men. They must do the mentorship. They've been empowered, and they must empower other women. They mustn't become queen bees who just want to be the only queen in there amongst the boys. But Avon has actually gone beyond a lot of what other companies have achieved.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to my panelists for joining us on stage and sharing some of their insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gugu, often the people that we speak to, the business people that we speak to, the entrepreneurs that we speak to say that entrepreneurs are not made. It's either you're born an entrepreneur or you're not. And I don't know what you're thinking around that concept is.
I think it's a very broad concept, and certainly there are elements and people who fit into either box in terms of being born an entrepreneur, being made an entrepreneur. But I think fundamentally there are qualities and leadership qualities, however aggressive or not aggressive they might be in terms of everyone's interaction in the business world.
This brings us to our next topic of discussion. This mother, I'm calling her a mother, I'm putting that hat on, has done incredibly well because her daughter happens to be part of a group, a company that is the largest listed company in Africa, whose CEO once told me on the side that the business that this young lady has co-founded is so great that they are thinking of taking it global.
Dr. Naledi Pandor is South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Prior to this, she held the positions of Minister of Higher Education and Training, Minister of Science and Technology, and Minister of Home Affairs. Dr. AISHA Pandor is the co-founder and CEO of Sweep South, Africa's first online platform for booking, managing, and paying for home cleaning. Sweep South has connected over 15,000 previously unemployed and underemployed domestic workers to work opportunities.
Thank you very much to both Dr. Pandor and Dr. Pandor for joining us here today, making it very clear that both women have PhDs in their own respective fields, education, and I also understand within the sciences background, if I'm not mistaken. I think as a disclaimer, Minister, we need to be clear that you do have 4 children in total. Aisha's not your favorite, right?
You don't have to say anything. It's fine.
They're all my favorites.
They are all your favorites. Yes. Spoken as a true parent who, of course, shares equal love for all her children. I'd like us to actually start off with engaging you in terms of the raising of your children and, of course, understanding that you share your insights with them, share your experiences with them. What's your experience been with raising Aisha and actually realizing that there's a sense of leadership and economic capability within her?
Let me say that one of the lessons I've learned is that you have to let children be who they wish to be. Aisha is a very strong-willed person who has her own ideas about what she wants to do. And I think as a mother, what we tried to do was nurture, where she wished to grow, but also encourage her to have as much experience in a range of areas as is possible. So we would encourage academic work. We also encourage sport, creativity. All my kids had to do speech and drama at school. It was very clear. So, you know, just nurture an interest in a wide range of things. I think that's really important. But she's also a person with her own mind. I thought, you know, I'd mapped out her career track because she was very good in science. I love science, but I'm bad at it. So I thought, God gave me Aisha. She's going to achieve, you know, because she was good in maths and science from small. And so, you know, she did very well at school, matric, and then went into a science faculty, did very, very well at undergraduate level, was invited to carry on with an honors degree, and did very well in the honors year, and was in fact asked to proceed to masters prior to finishing the honors, because she was, so I was like, you know, over the moon.
Yes, living out your
my dream, right?
Yes.
So anyway, she continues from masters, she's into the PhD track, and completes her PhD with much fanfare and celebration on our part, because I'm now thinking, here's our senior researcher. All these things I've been talking about of science and technology, my child is going to live the example I'm encouraging all South African children to follow, because this was what I was constantly communicating. Well, lo and behold, one day Aisha comes along with her husband, who happens to be a software engineer, and they tell us about this plan that they've already cooked up. And it's more or less complete. We're getting to know at the end point that they're going to start this tech startup. A few years down the line, here we are. I'm very proud of her. I have learned my lesson. Let your children go where they wish to go.
It was tough, and in fact, it wasn't a few months. I lived with my parents for probably 4 years.
Wow.
After starting our business. We eventually ended up selling everything that we had to fund the business. I think we moved out a year ago, maybe.
A year ago.
I was pregnant with my third child, and I said, now I've probably got to find my own house. Wow. So there were huge, you know, huge sacrifices. And although my parents did have reservations, they supported us, and I think that's also been a feature of my childhood, not just with myself, but with my 3 siblings as well, is that what my parents have focused on, and you know, my mom speaks about our upbringing, is bringing us up to have the right moral compass, so to make good moral decisions and ethical decisions, to be well educated. So I knew while I was doing my PhD, kind of towards the end of my writing up my thesis, I knew that this didn't feel like what I wanted to spend my life doing. But there was absolutely no way I was not going to finish that PhD. Like, then I would have been in big trouble. So education has always been, you know, and the choice of what we choose to study, my parents have left that up to us. But the idea of learning and knowledge has been very important. So I think what my parents have tried to do is instill the right sort of kind of baseline and the grounding, and then have allowed us to make decisions and given us some freedom in the decisions we make based off of the fact that they knew that they'd given us that grounding.
A powerful message that we all need to learn is to live your life authentically. Take it or leave it, but be that individual who is multifaceted and interested in a variety of themes and topics. Now, to engage in a panel discussion of women who are doing exactly that, Fifi Peters will moderate this particular conversation. Please warmly welcome the following panelists who will make their way up onto stage.
Ella Gandhi is the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, a peace activist and author. She was an ANC Member of Parliament in South Africa from 1994 to 2004 and represented the Phoenix area of Inanda in KZN. She's a recipient of the prestigious Padma Bhushan Award by the President of India. Ibukun Awosika is the chairman of First Bank of Nigeria Limited, as well as the founder and CEO of the Chair Center Group. The group companies are involved in manufacturing, retail and bankway security system services. Ibukun chairs a number of corporate and not-for-profit boards. Botang Morabe is an associate principal at the Public Investment Corporation, focusing on private equity transactions in South Africa and the rest of the African continent. She's also a seasonal finance lecturer at Witwatersrand University and serves as executive director in film productions. Toyin Sani is the Group Chief Executive Officer of the Emerging Africa Capital Group. She is an investment banker, lawyer, chartered secretary, stockbroker and author with over 30 years experience in finance, investment banking and investor services.
So we're talking about the dynamics of age, and given the fact that the workplace is changing and the people at the top are not as wrinkled and as grey as they used to be, they're pretty fresh. And how is this impacting women who are coming to the workplace in their second innings? Is age a factor right now in this workplace? I would like for us to begin with Ella, ma'am, if I can just start with you.
Age, as you said, is just a number. Because I think that it all depends on how much of energy you've got, how much of stamina to be able to travel and to be able to do the things that one wants to do. I think that all of us have aspirations and we want to do a lot, but we have to also know for ourselves how much we can actually do. And once you come to terms with what is possible for you to do, then you can plan in that way. So from very early childhood, I have learned that planning is very important. Always plan for the future.
Right.
And if you plan for the future, you take into account that there's a time when you are going to be less strong than before. There are times when you are not going to be able to do all the things that you would like to. And if you plan for that, then you are stress-free, for one thing, because you are not going to start trying to do and then not be able to do the things that you want to do and become stressed.
Aging is a fact of life. And it comes with changes to our physiology. But we need to understand that there is a lot of advantages also to being of a particular age, which is the experience you have gathered over the years, the credibility you have gathered over the years because of what you have actually accomplished. So you have a track record behind you. And so when you come into the workplace or you start a business as an entrepreneur, those who are doing business with you, your partners, your employers, if you are being employed, they're getting the complete package, which is the benefit of the wealth of experience, the benefit of the track record, and very importantly, the benefit of your credibility. Because in a world where increasingly you have a deficit of trust, people want to be sure exactly that they can trust in you. So if I were a young person starting a business, it could be useful to have people with established track record on my board, for example, or even joining me in executive management in relevant roles.
Because of the industry that you're working with now, with technology, with the face of technology being a lot more youthful, age wouldn't be an experience or it wouldn't be an advantage, as Toyin has said, in that particular instance.
Shouldn't be, right? There's what happens in practice where women are being marginalized because of age, because of sex. So of course there's those sexism issues, there's those ageism issues. I've just spent an hour with very powerful women that I'm sitting here on the panel with. Just that 1 hour coming as the baby millennial. Just in 1 hour, I would like to tell you of the plethora of knowledge that I've collected. Now, if you then superimpose that in the workplace, in the field that I work in, I would say age shouldn't matter because it brings diversity to the team. It brings a whole lot of value add. There's so much that you can learn. There's so much that you can actually take into consideration. There's so much value that you can actually draw from a diverse team. And who's so to teach you better than a seasoned woman? So I don't think it should matter at all, not in my industry.
Personally, I have no respect for age. I think your life, it's a function of time that you have. Everybody here has, if you check your birth certificate, there's a time of birth. And on your death certificate, whenever that is, there'll be a time of death. So what does that mean? The entirety of your life is quantified in time. And I believe that whatever time you have, there must be value created for it. Yeah. Now, you have that time in different seasons. Yeah. And there's value that you have at different stages of your life. Yeah. And if we want a world or a workplace or a society that works, we must combine the value that we all have at different stages of our lives together in order to create community value. Yeah. You know, in my culture, I'm Nigerian, and I'm from the southwest of Nigeria. In our culture, there's a saying that when an elder sits on one side and a young person is trying to cut a tree down, that elderly person can already tell you where that tree is going to fall, what direction. But that young person might not know. Yeah. Now, if it's a wise young person, and the elderly person says, be careful, don't cut from that side. And he doesn't say, why? What do you know? Your time has passed. And the elderly person then keeps quiet and watches the tree fall on that young person. The guy is going to come back and say, oh, but you should have told me that you knew that's what would happen. Which is why age is a function of your mind and your interpretation of your time and your season. I've lived all of my life being too young for the life I've lived.
Fifi, we've certainly come to the end of today's program in terms of some of the insight that we've shared and many of the lessons that we've gained here today.